Hey everyone, just getting together tonight with Mathew Steele. He wasn't able to see the hangout I had with Eric Hovind and Landin last night, but he did graciously watch it today and apparently has some comments. So I'm gonna let him beat me up for the next 20 minutes or so and just kind of critique what we did last night and comment on what they said, what I said, and just try to have a little bit of fun for the next 20, 30 minutes. Matthew, what were you wanting to get together for?
Well, we haven't discussed, um, basically how it went. Um, it's like a 20. Oh, hold on a second. It's like a 25-minute video. I just got around to watching it today because I'm working so much, and I really just wanted to talk about it because I think you guys had a really great discussion. I was very impressed by Landon and Eric, the way they conducted themselves, and I don't know. I just wanted to give feedback, sort of do a play-by-play. If there's any points you wanted to make, any comments I wanted to make, I think doing it all above board and uh, openly as possible, uploading this and warts and all, I think is the best, most honest way to do it. And I don't really have anything else to say. I thought it was a great discussion, and I would have. I mean, there are other points that I would have made had I been there, but I wasn't there. You were there, and you did a fantastic job. So
Well,
I didn't have any issue at all with how you did. Um, so I say let's just go ahead and play it and see where we go.
all right. And I definitely want to give a shout out to Eric and Landon as well. I mean, them inviting me on and allowing me basically free reign. I could ask anything I wanted. They didn't balk at any of the questions. Um, you know, I, as far as their professionalism and everything that was done, I was very, very impressed. So let's go ahead and get into it and let's have fun for the next 30 minutes or so. So I'll go ahead and start it now and let's. Oh, by the way, I will be on camera, which is pretty scary. So try not to balk too much on that. That's
Okay.
kind of who I am and you know where I'm coming from.
Well, tell us a little bit about your. You said this is something you think about a lot, struggle with. Tell me where you're at right now in your journey on trying to figure out the problem of evil.
Well, I mean, listening to you guys, I mean, I think you've kind of hit all the main points as far as where most people tend to, I guess, attack the problem of evil. And to me, it goes a little bit deeper than that. And, knowing you guys a little bit through the internet and whatever, I know y'all are literalists and, believe in divine command theory and basically everything that is everything that happens is a part of God's plan. I also, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this stuff, I hate people that fight straw men, so I want to make sure you're represented the way that I think you are. I think that also you say that all morality stems from God and there is a reflection of God's nature. Therefore, any command or act that God is a part of must be, by definition, a good and, if not absolute, good act. I think that comes from Job 34:12, where it says it's unthinkable that God would do any wrong or that the Almighty would pervert justice. That's fairly accurate, right? Or that?
Yeah, I would agree. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that also, Ned. And the only part where I would differentiate just a little bit when you use the term literalist, I don't exactly use that term literalist. I take the Bible on its own terms. I acknowledge that there are poetry, epistolary writers, apocalyptic literature.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to comment on that. That was the first thing I noticed when I heard this. I know you didn't, bring this up as a point of contention during the discussion, but they are both. See, the way that we would classify them as literalists is not the way that they would classify themselves as literalists. In the same way that when a non-Christian uses the term fundamentalist, they don't mean the same thing as a Christian would say fundamentalist. A literalist, as far as we're concerned, is someone who considers the Bible to be true in whatever manner they think it's true, above and beyond anything else, any other evidence that might conflict with it. That's what the way I understand a literalist, and from what I understand, these guys are literalists in that sense. I know he clarifies a little bit how he sees different books, that tries to take them in context, whether they're literature, allegory, or I don't know, pure historical accounts, that sort of thing. But the point is to take the Bible as true, even if it conflicts with what's found in reality. That, to me, is a literalist. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, and to be, I guess, I don't know, very nitpicky. I think Landon clarified there, but did it in a way that I think makes sense. I think, at least the way I took what he said there is if something is poetic, you can't go in there and then pick it apart and critique it like you would a scientific statement. But at the same time, when it's a historical narrative, like later on I use 2 Samuel and 1 Samuel and a lot of historical text. If it happened in there, which he seemed to follow along with, was actually what occurred at that time period. It was absolutely true that Saul went and carried out all these actions. And I think that's the important part, is that he's being careful there, but to me it was in a good way, because if I were to go to one of the, let's say, poetic narratives and then started to try to tear that apart, well, you've got to take that in the context that it's at. So I really didn't have any problem with it.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So, and I think he's right, though. I think a lot of people, since they haven't read the Bible enough to understand when there's an allegory or when there's a poetic narrative, and they pull something, just one line of scripture out, and go, how can you even think this could possibly be true? It doesn't reflect reality at all. Well, yeah, it's a poetic statement. I mean,
Well, yeah, like Eric says later on, you have to look at the larger picture as much as you can, as honestly as you can. One other thing that I wanted to point out here that he goes on to say in just a couple of seconds, so I'll say it now, just so I'm not asking you to stop again in 20 seconds of video, is that he takes the Bible on its own terms, or tries to. And my issue there is that there are, in some ways, historically speaking, as far as the scholars are concerned, it's not possible to take it on its own terms, because there are terms that we are not aware of. They've been lost over time. And that way, I mean, yes, you can look at the larger picture in terms of what you interpret the larger picture to be, but it's kind of hard to build that larger picture when some of the foundation of the meaning of the Bible in those early days is lost. Right. But so what I'm trying to say is taking the Bible on its own terms is kind of, not in a dishonest way, but it's kind of misleading, because it sounds like you are letting the Bible speak to you, letting the Bible just be what it is. But there is going to be some interpretation involved, some conception that you put together as the reader, no matter what you do. There's no way around that.
Well,
so you're going to end up with an imperfect picture of it no matter what you do.
Right, and I think we see that later on when I start referencing Revelation, because for them to say that during what happens with the fourth horseman alone, not to mention the angels of the Euphrates, to mandate that God could only use those methods to bring about genocide, is pure interpretation. There's nothing in there that says there's any restriction to God at all, other than their belief that it is New Covenant versus Old Covenant, and therefore God will have to do it himself or only send angels to do it. He would have no servants here that would carry out orders from God like he did with Saul and other people in the Old Testament, which to me is kind of a stretch. But again, it's so. Again, I think you're right. I don't think they did it maliciously, or he's not doing it dishonestly. It just, I think it may have gotten. It gets to the point where you don't have a choice. If you're going to believe, there's some of these things you have to temper, or it's not going to make sense, and it's going to be tough to digest. So, I'll go ahead and hit it again unless you had something else.
For those type of genres to express themselves however the language warrants. So I'm not a literalist in that hard sense. But other than that, yeah, you're right on track, bud.
Oh, okay, all right, great. I'm glad that I'm at least somewhere in the ballpark, if not right on. So, with that, then I guess, I mean, the way I see it is with all that stuff in mind, it seems to me that, like the examples you guys used earlier and have used quite a bit through in the past, is that the killing of babies, genocide, would not only be looked at as not objectively evil acts, because when we look to God's Word, we find many instances of God commanding others to do those exact things, or even examples where God himself kills individual babies and commits both local and global genocide, like you mentioned earlier with the flood, Eric. To be clear, since we know God is the objective standard of good, and he cannot go against his nature, by definition, anything he does must be good. It would seem to follow, then, that in those cases, you guys should be fighting that killing those babies or committing that genocide was an absolute good. And that brings me to a question that I haven't been able to get around. And when I ask this, it seems like most people haven't been able to get around it. And to be clear, I mean, it's not rhetorical, guys. I really hope that y'all can provide me some insight to this. But if your God provided you with the means to kill every living thing in some city, let's say Dearborn, Michigan, and say it's because of the high concentration of Muslims, and then commanded you to do so, would you go into that city and kill
just happened there? Damn it. Shit.
Was that a buffering issue, or what's going on?
Matthew, you still hear me?
Yeah, I still hear you.
I can't hear you, man. Say something, see if it'll pick up again.
I have already
Wonderful.
said something, so if you're not hearing me, it must be on your
I
end.
have no idea what's going on with my damn speakers. I mean, I'm running through my computer. Damn it. Well, I will definitely have to go and cut this up again, it looks like.
That's live for you.
Let me see if that helps at all.
Testing. Testing, testing.
See, it seems to me my speakers are gone. So let me see if I can go in. It's not, the problem is it's not feeding, I'm not getting any sound on my end.
Testing, testing.
Okay.
Still can't hear me?
No idea. No idea at all. Nope. Still not doing anything. God,
Still right?
wonderful. Let me try this and see if this will do anything. I have no idea why it would all of a sudden just drop my sound. Here's output. Let's try that. Matthew, try to unmute and say something. Let me see if I can hear you.
Testing, testing.
You still look muted, man.
I unmuted and said testing, testing.
No, still nothing.
Testing.
Damn it, I don't want to start this whole thing over and scrap this. But I don't know what to do other than restart my stupid computer. There it goes. All right, apparently it caught up, so I'll just go. I'm hoping I can edit this little bit of screw up out. If not, sorry everybody. Just gonna have to deal with it. All right, let's keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
The epitome of no true Scotsman, or the never was a thing.
Along with the rest of the Amalekites in that sense, he came back.
If your God provided you with the means to kill every living thing in some city, let's say Dearborn, Michigan, and say it's because of the high concentration of Muslims, and then commanded you to do so, would you go into that city and kill every animal, every man, woman, suckling child, and infant, like we see in 1 Samuel with Saul?
Okay, let me take a shot at that if I can, Eric. Ned, ultimately, and I think you bring up good points, that we have to look at the unfolding redemptive plan of God from start to finish. We start with the premise God controls everything. And because he's sovereign over everything, if he chooses to utilize his covenant people in terms of a nation to execute his justice, then he's right to do that. So if there's a group of people that are outside his covenant that have failed to repent, and God wants to utilize his covenant people as instruments of his justice, he's perfectly right to do so. We all deserve death. We're conceived in sin. We deserve death even as infants. I personally do believe in original sin, that infants are born into sin and they need the mercy of God just like everybody. And the example is giving, it's called hacking Agag to pieces, because Agag wasn't killed along with the rest of the Amalekites in that sense. He came back, and it was worse, because he came back with a rage and a fury and a mounted army that was trouble for Israel. So God, in his sovereignty, knowing that none of those people would come to repentance, and protecting his covenant people in that, is perfectly right and just in order to execute his justice that way. Now,
I mean, this is one of the places where looking back on it, I wish I would have been a little more, I guess, aggressive, because he goes on in a second to say that, well, in fact, I'm going to let it play all the way out. I shouldn't have stopped it there because I'd forgotten that this was it. Wow, I am kicking butt tonight, guys.
Fast forward it to contemporary terms. Would God, if God told me to kill every Muslim animal and so forth, well, first of all, I want to separate animals as a different category. God is sovereign over those animals, and animals are neither moral or immoral. They're just part of his creation. And so if he wants us to murder an animal for a sacrifice or for food, it's okay for us to do that. They're separate. Today, I don't believe God would do that, because God has closed the canon with the final book being written. God doesn't have anything else to say. And at this point in redemptive history, we are to fight for justice. That's why we've constructed aspects such as just war theory, where there's such a gross negligence of justice in a particular part of the world. We take the onus and the conviction to go be peacemakers, meaning if there is no peace, we have to go make it. And if we have the means, motive, and opportunity to prevent evil and don't, we are then an accomplice to that evil. So, for example, the injustices that may be going on in the Darfur region or elsewhere, we are motivated to go try to physically restrain that evil from the civilians that are in that area that are under gross injustice. And so in New Testament terms, That's our call to arms in that sense. We're no longer, God is not unfolding a redemptive national covenant people as he was with the nation of Israel. That covenant was fulfilled in the person and work of Christ. In the new covenant, we can operate our Christian faith under any environment. The early church operated their Christian faith under heavy persecution and did so to the glory of God that way. Now, again, if we have the ability to fight for justice, we can go do that based on that conviction. But none of us would go to Dearborn, Michigan and kill every Muslim unless those Muslims were slaughtering those civilians in that area, and we wanted to restrain that evil. Now,
Okay, so I've got about 3 points.
I definitely want to hit that after you do, because he just said something right there that I definitely want to comment on. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, like I said, I wish I would have focused more on that point instead of allowing the conversation, because, I mean, a couple of things that looking back on it that hit me really hard is one, Landon anyway, and Eric seemed to follow suit later on, that those were goods. Even giving his other analogy of, you know, the armies coming back and being even more trouble for Israel. So everything that was done, including killing the children, was all an objective good, which would lead me to believe that if I would have been smart enough to ask the question in the way I should have and said, okay, instead of fast forwarding, let's put you in the situation that Saul was in those days and under the old covenant, would you have committed the same genocide? From what it sounded like, it leads me to believe that he would have said yes. He would have. He wouldn't have had a problem. The other point, and this one's kind of a side issue, which really isn't a big deal, but it was a little insightful to me when he wanted to bring out the animals, because killing the animals because they're, you know, subject to us or whatever. But what I wish I would have expanded on that too was what about cruelty to animals? Since they're just our playthings, I guess, can man go and, you know, torture kittens if they want to, just because they don't have a soul and they're just property of man? So that's the points I wish I would have either had time or been on my game enough to expand and really hit on from that point. That's all I had, Matthew. Go ahead, and what did you want to talk about?
Those, but the point that I wanted to hit the most was that cats are so annoying. The takeaway point here seems to be that there is no act that we could imagine that is immoral if God commands it. Now, the problem there is, as he says, as he claims, Landin, the canon is closed, which means that not only is God not going to be giving any more direct commands to people according to the Bible, but God is also, you know, basically responsible for everything that, as literalists, as we've defined it, everything that God commanded in the Bible that is reflective of his character of goodness. So that gives us justification to say nothing is out of bounds for God, no matter where you find it in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, that is reflective of God's character if he commanded it. Period. There is no other way to interpret that. So the problem I have there is to assign good, the term good, to God and to any act that you believe God commands you to do, or believe that someone in the Bible was commanded by God to do. God, being good, therefore, just becomes a tautology. God and good are interchangeable with each other. Good is just reflective of God's nature and has no meaning otherwise. Period.
Yeah, that's actually
anything. That's a problem. That's a big problem, because the term good, therefore, just means godly. It doesn't mean what in the colloquial sense, the the cultural sense we think of as good, as in beneficial. No, it doesn't mean that. It means godly. It means pious. It means something that is reflective of God. Now, since the Bible is the last the last revelation of God, the last direct communication of God to people, then that is what we should, according to the literalist, that is what we should be using as our guidebook for what we're supposed to do. And the problem there, as we've already touched on, is that there is this buffer of unknown involved with the writing of the Bible as far as how some parts of it we're supposed to interpret, which means that the full goodness of God is always going to be unknown to us unless somehow those gaps are filled, those holes in our interpretation of the Bible are closed. And I don't see that happening. So we are always going to be left with our interpretation of what the Bible says. So instead of a direct revelation, which was provided to the people of the Bible, some of them supposedly, we can only go by what they say was their revelation. And that means basically we're using our judgment even when we think it's godly. We are still filtering it through our judgment. Now, I don't see any way around that.
No, I agree. And, I mean, I think, it's been pointed out quite a few times that even with 1% of the Bible, that a lot of even the leading apologists will concede that, the Bible's erroneous or missing at least 1%. You can completely change the entire Bible. I mean, with, a few words, once upon a time, as the precursor to the Bible, everything changes. Or the very last line of the Bible, this was all fictitious. Please don't believe anything that was written before this. I mean, those two sentences thrown in completely change the entire narrative of the Bible. And that's way less than 1%. And without knowing definitively that that's not part of the original text, it's troubling to me that you'll take that leap and believe it. But again, that's a totally separate issue, and I definitely don't want to color them in any way they may not believe, since I haven't discussed that. So
and in all fairness, they are saying that God now would not command them to go kill everyone in Dearborn, Michigan. That's what Landin seems to be saying. Because the canon is closed, God wouldn't do that, because there isn't any more revelation from God. Anything telling you to go kill everyone in Dearborn, Michigan that you interpret to be giving you a spiritual message or speaking to your soul or whatever would not be God. Well, it would be Satan or a demon or something, but it would not be God.
Well, but what I want to be
for the people of the Bible. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just want to be real clear. The only reason, and again, Landon, if you're seeing this, I'm not representing you in the way that you really believe. Please, we can have a hangout. I'll come back on your show, whatever you want to do, or even comment section. But from what I'm hearing, Eric and Landon, the only reason they wouldn't do it is because they believe God wouldn't ask that of them. But if somehow they were convinced that God did open the canon again, or they were put in that position somehow, it seems to me that they would have no problem carrying out those orders. And I think that needs to be a very clear point here, that it's not they wouldn't do it, it's that they just don't think they will have to do it. And that's, to me, that's very.
Well, I've got one other. I've just got a small point to add on to that, and then let's continue. But if the Bible, which we have now established, is not inerrant in terms of how it's written, there are flaws in it. There are human flaws in it, to the point that there is always going to be that element of doubt. that being said, if the Bible is supposedly the last revelation of God, how would a Christian ever know, or anyone interpreting what the Bible says, how would they ever know if God didn't speak to them and they were wrong about the Bible being the last revelation? What if God actually did speak to them and the Bible was simply wrong about that part, or it was miswritten or whatever, and God will speak to people? Because if Jesus comes back, how are they going to know it's actually Jesus? Wouldn't he be speaking to people? Wouldn't he be, again, providing the revelation in Revelation? Right? So that saying that's the last canon, it doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'm assuming that they would get around that, again, by saying it would be revealed in such a way that we know it to be true, which, again, that's a whole other can of worms. But other than that, I think you're absolutely right. I don't know how you get around that. No. All right, I'll go ahead and keep going from there.
That's quick. We can really unpack that for a long time, but I hope that gives you a little bit of grounding of how we can hold those things together.
Well, I mean, it does, and it seems to, I mean, again, and I may be wrong on this, but as far as, you know, being Old Testament, New Testament, I grant that everything that I quoted was Old Testament, no doubt. Yep. But we do see New Testament. There are many cases, well, at least two that I can remember off the top of my head, Acts 5, 1 through 11, and Acts 12, 23, where God specifically kills people in the New Testament. We also know in Revelation that he's going to commit genocide again, fourth horseman if nothing else, and the angels at the head of the Euphrates. All of those are going to commit mass genocide.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me answer that real quick. Again, the difference is you had positioned God commanding us to execute the genocide like what was in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, God has always been at his liberty, at his sovereignty to end life at any moment because he owns all life. Every breath we take is from the good gift of God, and because of our sin, we deserve death at any moment. So if God wants to execute justice at any moment, he has the right to do so. So if he did that in Acts 5, Acts 12, if he does it today through a hurricane, a tornado, an earthquake, whatever the case may be, he's perfectly good to do that because of our sin. And in Revelation, yes, he will bring complete judgment to the whole earth, but his patience is allowing time for us to repent and get under the covering blood of our Lord Jesus that we can be reconciled to him.
Right, and I guess that kind of goes back, that feeds into what you guys were saying earlier about atheists not having an objective.
I'm not sure he understands what he just said, because that's pretty massive. To say that any hurricane or basically anything that God allows to happen on Earth, he's perfectly just in doing that. Well, what about the supposed evil forces of demons and Satan and anything that they do? Is God then allowing them to do that as well, as part of his will? Does that mean that the evil done by Satan and by demons, if they should exist, is also according to God's will and wishes? In which case, God is then incorporating evil, as is commonly as is commonly called, evil forces, evil entities, evil actions. He's incorporating that into not just his divine plan, but his intentionality.
Well, see,
and if something terrible happens to people, like a massive disaster, earthquake, whatever, Landin is saying that we have no value, so we have no place to even comment on that. We are worthless.
And
so we have no room to complain when something happens to us, period.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I wish I would have expanded or actually hit on more, is that if all of this is part of God's plan, which we established in the beginning there, then all of this is for the glory of God, which means no matter how evil something looks on the surface, and I think Eric actually touches on this later on, it's all good. It doesn't matter because all of this is for God's glory. So even using what we would consider to be evil acts and having setting Satan loose on the world with all the demons, if you want to look at it that way, that's still a good act because in the end it glorifies God, which, I mean, I have a problem with. I mean, if we're nothing more than just these little...
Yeah, the question we're left with, is there anything actually such as evil? Does evil actually exist if everything is according to God's plan? Is evil even a thing at all?
And I was talking to a couple of guys last night, and this kind of came up in a hangout, and there may be an interesting argument that could be made that the only evil, as far as if you use Scripture and use the Bible, would be free will, because when we see man or anybody, including Satan and the angels and all that, use their free will, that's when they're punished. That's when God's wrath explodes, is when people decide, we want to do our own thing. We want to make our own choices. And even with the concept of hell, if I choose to live my life the way that I want to, not the way God mandates, the exercise of my free will condemns me. So I think that's a very poignant question, because, again, what is evil? We can't base it on what we see in the Bible, because there's a lot of stuff that I would absolutely say is evil that God himself does.
But that's you being worthless, making a judgment against God when you have no right to do that.
Exactly.
As you're a worthless nothing. You have no right to judge God, period. So don't even, you should just shut up now. You have nothing to say because you're worthless.
Right, and that's the point, is that believing that mandates that, just like you said, and I think that those words are perfect, we become worthless. We're nothing. So anything that happens to us in this fulfilling of God's glory, God's plan, is, so what? I mean, fine. It doesn't matter, because we don't know.
Okay. Something just occurred to me that I don't understand, and maybe you can help me out with here. If we're worthless, if we have no value whatsoever, that means that we have we mean nothing to God. If value is determined by God and God's nature, and we are worthless, that means that we are basically a zero, a non-entity in God's eyes. So how is anything that we do affecting God? Bringing about his wrath? How is our worthlessness creating a reaction in him? I'm not even going to go into the problem of him being changeless and being affected by us. I'm going to point out that if we are worthless, then everything that we do is worthless, and it means nothing to God. And yet, free will, doing something that is supposedly against his will, when such a thing isn't apparently even possible, it all just sounds like when you take a dog and you put a biscuit on their nose and make them sit there and not eat the biscuit. Just look at it on their nose and never let them eat it. It's just a manipulation game. And although I'm sure a lot of literalists would disagree with this, it sounds like we're in no position, being worthless, to even ask questions like this in the first place. The worthlessness, more and more to me, sounds like an easy way out of these reasonable issues that we find when we actually think about what the Bible says. You're not supposed to do that. So, anyway.
Absolutely you're not. I mean, look what happened to Job when he asked God, after he had been through all of his torments. God didn't give him any answer. He just berated him for asking the question in the first place. So I think you're dead on there. I think that not only should we just shut up and take it, but we don't even have the right to ask why. Which, I mean, from my standpoint, it's, and I hope I don't, I mean, if Eric and Landon or anybody else, believers watch this, I hope I'm not offending anybody too much in this, but to me it's sad, because once you condemn yourself, once you belittle yourself to the point of that much of just a useless toy, or not even that, it makes life. It's kind of funny, because thinking on this and starting to kind of maybe get some insight, when some Christians say that life is meaningless without God, it's starting to become at least somewhat plausible to me that it's meaningless with God, because I mean, what is my life? It's nothing more than what God has relegated to fulfilling His plan, and outside of that,
it's like I said in an earlier video, you're supposed to spend your life praising and worshiping God, so you can go to heaven when you die, praising and worshiping God for the rest of eternity.
Right, but
that's your only function.
Right, and outside that, it's meaningless. You have nothing. And I've used this before, and we're getting a little off track, so we'll try to get back on, so we don't waste a whole lot of time.
Right. I would just like to point out, for anybody who's confused, we are both atheists. We both disagree that the Bible is true. So when we talk about God and God's agency, we are performing a thought experiment as if God were real. That's what we're talking about. The way that the concept of God is presented to us, what it would do if it were true. That's so somebody doesn't come back and say, hey, well, you're talking about God, so obviously you're not atheist. Well, that's why, is because we're thinking about the thought experiment of, if God were true, if the Bible were true, then this is what we think would happen. Just trying to understand it.
It's just an exercise in cognitive dissonance. I mean, we're allowing ourselves to go down that road to see where it leads. And for anybody that hadn't watched any of my stuff, that's what I do. I grant every premise I possibly can from the opposition, and then run it through the mill to see where it leads. And that's how I come up with that's my methodology to come up with argumentation, or I should say counter-apologetics. But anyway, I don't want to get into all that. You want to go ahead and go, or was there anything else you want to expand on that? All right, we'll go ahead and go.
Standard to discern what is good and what is evil.
Right.
It would seem to me that, based on Scripture, it's not the action that is evil, because we see God killing infants, as we do in 2 Samuel with, a less than a day old baby, he strikes ill, and the baby suffers for 7 days and dies. So we know that killing children, and even what I would classify as torturing children, can be an absolute good. So again, I guess the test, or the question I would have is that if those are objective goods, what is objective evil at this point?
The difference is in motive, and I wouldn't use the term torture. I don't think they were ever, even when God was executing the annihilation of the Amalekites, he never told them to torture them. I don't think that's there. What's implied there, Ned?
Just a point of clarity on the torture deal. I feel like I dropped the ball here. I should have pointed that out. If torture is not part of God's plan, then what is going on in hell? That's a point I should have brought out. Do you have something on that, Matthew?
Not only that, but the yes, and I agree with that, and the week of suffering of the baby that you mentioned. Yeah, that is torture.
It was
to cause suffering to extend for a week, according to God's plan, to cause suffering intentionally. So there is suffering. That's torture.
Yeah, and there's plenty of other passages where, look at what happened to Job. I mean, Job alone, if anybody suffered, and I guess the test I would use is, if I were to take somebody and do what God or Satan, depending on who you think did it, or I allowed someone to do to someone else, anyone else, even one of us lowly sinners, what happened to Job, I don't think there's many people out there that wouldn't classify that as torture. So even on this planet, with God's oversight and direct supervision of what Satan was doing, knowing exactly what was going on play by play, I'm sorry, but that's got to be torture. I don't know how else you would get around that. So, yeah, and
to further compound the problem, to only believe that the canon is closed, to just have that be your position. Okay, the canon is closed. That's what I believe, as Landon seems to be saying. That doesn't make it a fact. The canon may not be closed, in which case, anything that someone does and then attributes to God, saying, God told me to do this, there's no way for you to say, God didn't tell you to do that. No matter what it is. They might be telling the truth. There's no way to be certain about that.
Well, I mean,
unless you're certain that the canon is closed, and you can't be. So it just goes around and around in circles.
Well, I mean, yeah, and you've got people like Andrea Yates and Deanne Laney, and just this May or May of last year, there was a lady called Kimberly Dawn Lucas. She was actually from their part of the country. It was in Jupiter, Florida. She killed a 2-year-old and tried to kill a 10-year-old, but the brother actually got away. And when she got caught, or when the police came, she gave a statement saying that the pastor that she had listened to the week before, the sermon had, and I'll quote her exactly, the pastor's sermon really, really touched me yesterday, but God never told me to stop. Now, of course, what she was doing is she was reenacting the story of Abraham and Isaac. But, of course, God didn't stop her at that time, so she ended up killing the 2-year-old. These type of things happen all the time. And like you said, if there was a couple of words out of place, then the canon is still open, and you're right. Either through her interpretation of what was being told to her through that sermon, or, in the direct case of like an Andrea Yates, where she really thought God told her to kill her kids. Or no, it wasn't. It was Deanne Laney that was the one that they said specifically to kill her kids. Whatever, one of those two. But you're right. I mean, there's no way to know that that's not it. And again, to me, that's the dangerous part, because as much as Landon has tried to get away from that fact, he never outright comes out and says that he would not have done it if he was in that place. In fact, he is fighting that all of that was good. Those were good actions, which, again, leads me to believe that he would carry it out if he was convinced that the canon was open, or somehow God changed his mind or whatever and told him to do it. You want to keep going? All right, let's go.
Ultimately is the motive and the intention. That's why there's a difference between murder and killing. Killing at times, again, we're in a sinful world, and part of that sin is sometimes we have to use bad things to prevent other evils. And it's not to say that we're duplicitous. It's not to say that the standard still doesn't hold true. But again, our sin deserves death. And so the act of killing, if somebody has used their volition to such an extent, they forfeited their life. They forfeited their right to exist in that sense. So there could be an ultimate law or a justice that would say this person is no longer allowed to live in society because they forfeited that based on their actions, be that rape, murder, so on and so forth. And so it's okay for the government to bring about possibly a situation of execution in order to restrain or prevent that person from committing more acts of evil. This is just a byproduct, man, of being in a fallen, sinful world. It's not pretty, it's not clean, but that goes again to the idea of motive. God's actions are holy, pure, and righteous, and everybody deserves death. So that's not really the issue as much as, I think where you were putting it, and a good place to put it is, where does that fit on us? When are we okay to do those things? And those are very limited, and man, we struggle with it. I don't know that we have a great, ultimate, clean answer for that. Sometimes we get it wrong, buddy. I mean, honestly. But ultimately, we do trust in the standard of God.
And that's fair, man. And I mean, again, I love the answer. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
so the reason I even do this stuff is because, I ultimately want to be proven wrong, because the way I look at it is the only way you can grow is to be brave enough and honest enough that when you're wrong, to admit it and incorporate those new beliefs and new understanding into your your system.
Hey, Ned, since we've only got 7 minutes left here, I want to give a quick analogy that I think may be helpful for some people out there, and then I want to
Hold on a
ask
second,
you
just there.
directly.
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that the discussion you were just having with Landon was about the Christian problem of evil. And Landon seemed to be perfectly willing to discuss that with you, even though you're an atheist, even though you reject the truth of the Bible. He was still willing to have that discussion with you. But it seems to me, as an observer, and I might be wrong because I wasn't there, I wasn't in part of the discussion, what was said before, what was said after, etc. It seems to me like once you started asking questions that pointed out genuine issues that Christians have with Christianity, like the problem of evil and how to deal with it, you were confronted with Eric basically asking you, how do you justify asking any questions at all as an atheist, which is completely against the point. As Landon says, the problem of evil is a Christian problem. They invited you on to discuss the problem from your atheist perspective, but it's still a Christian problem. So for him to then ask you how you justify from your position any aspect of morality is completely unwarranted. If you were being invited on to discuss atheist morality, atheist ethics, secular morality, however you want to call it, that's different. But it seems a little bit like a derailment when something came up that looked like a weak point, and that worries me. We should be focusing on fixing the weak points instead of just saying, yeah, they're there and we struggle with it, but how do you even ask those questions? That's just not a productive line of dialogue. And I respect that he kept that until the very end instead of hitting you with it at the beginning. They actually let you get your points out. That I respect, and I appreciate that they conducted themselves the way that they did. But this seems to be the problem that always crops up when there is dialogue between believers and non-believers. And if there is a problem in Christianity and we want to talk about it, there's nothing wrong with conducting thought experiments. If there is a perceived problem on either side, open dialogue should be fine rather than just sniping at each other like this. Anyway, I'm rambling. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, maybe it was because I was in the conversation, and even after in the conversation, the off-air portion. I mean, they were very, very accommodating. Like you said, they did let me get my questions out for the most part. They didn't seem, and I don't care. I mean, I was going to hold this back, but I'm not going to. It was the complete opposite of when I was involved with, Matt Slick and all of those guys, to where it was complete runaround. There was never, and at least in my opinion with those guys, they never honestly tried to address any of the points that I made, to the point of, Matt Slick completely not even addressing Nope when they asked me on to talk about Nope specifically. These guys seemed like they were really trying, and I think that what happened there with Eric is one of two things. Either he really honestly wanted to know, well, guys, okay, let's say that you're right on this. How do you deal with evil in your worldview? He honestly may want to know that question, which I agree was not the topic. I mean, theodicy was what we were supposed to be talking about. That's what they asked me on to talk about, problem of evil as it applies to Christianity. But on the flip side of that, I'm actually glad he did, because, like I state in a little while, I don't think enough people are prepared when they do get hit with that question to come up with at least a rational response to where, okay, I can see how you can deal with evil now in your world. So, I mean, there's good and bad there, and I agree that if he was doing it to get us off topic, then that's not fair in any way. But if he honestly just wanted to know,
I would just like to, yeah, I would just like to point out that I don't think that he was doing it to be duplicitous. I don't think that he was doing it. I don't think he was doing it intentionally to sidetrack you. I think that it was just making him uncomfortable, and that's why he said it. I don't think that he is a overtly dishonest person. I just think he's wrong.
Right, and again, that, I mean,
I
think
I have no ill will against either one of these guys.
Right, and I guess the point that I'm making, or the point that I really want to try to get across, at least with this, is that if we're going to be willing to put ourselves out there and converse with, people in a public forum like this, be prepared to go down all kinds of rabbit holes. I'm the worst in the world, and I'll be the first to admit, I did it way too much with Matt Slick. I let him lead me down all these blind rabbit holes, and we never got to the question, and that's what he wanted. He wanted to burn enough time to where they could feel like they talked to me long enough and then cut me off. But I still think that we need to do a better job as skeptics, as atheists, at least some of us, to where damn near anything that can come up, you've got some type of response for. And with the internet and with being able to go and dig, I don't think that's asking too much. I think we really can, because there's enough canned answers out there. You don't have to be original and come up with your own. There's enough good responses. I mean, listen to Hitchens, if nothing else. Even though I may not like his methodology and the way that he presents things, his responses are really, really good. So being prepared to me is just as important as being prepared to stick to the topic. Probably you're right. I should be more forceful in mandating that we stay on topic, because it has bit me in the ass more than once. But I don't know. And so I don't know if that made any sense or not. I feel like I'm rambling. So you want to keep going? All right, let's go.
An atheist worldview, do you agree, would you say it's true, we don't have a standard for the problem of evil, we can't account for it? But let me give this analogy, and then I want you to answer that question for us, because we only got 6 minutes left here. If I told you, or if I asked you the question, Ned, is it wrong for a man, and maybe you've heard this before, is it wrong for a man to stab a 5-year-old girl in the chest with a knife?
It is if he's committing surgery. So yes, I have heard it before.
You have, yeah. And a lot of people will say, yes, that's wrong. And absolutely wrong, absolutely wrong. And then, okay, now hang on. Let me give you some bigger context, some more perspective on this story. The man's doing open heart surgery on this little girl, or she's going to die. And just to let you know, every time I've come across somebody who says, well, look at the God of the Old Testament, why would he allow? And I'm going, wait a minute. You haven't yet looked at the bigger context. You haven't looked at the bigger picture. You don't have all the information you need to make that judgment call. And then I would say, if you are going to make a judgment call, what are you making that judgment call based on? And so that's where I get ultimately to the question, do you see that, hey, if atheism is true, there is no problem of evil? And whether or not you agree with that, do you get what we're saying when we say, hang on, what standard are you using to judge?
Well, yeah, and I'll kind of answer those in reverse if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that there is a standard that you can go off of. In fact, I'll be the first one to admit that most atheists, most skeptics for that matter, answer that question very poorly. I don't think they've thought it through enough. But as far as being able to set a standard for what is moral, yeah, I mean, a moral act, at least in my opinion, is any individual or group action that, if that practice was continued and adopted on a societal level, would benefit society and the species, and then in order the individual last. Conversely, any action that would harm society and or individuals, or ultimately result in the destruction of humanity, is a bad act. I don't know if I'd use evil, but bad. So based on that test, I haven't been able to find anything that I couldn't weigh one way or another. Now, does that mean those are objective standards? No. Everything breaks down to a subjective, conditional morality. And I mean, I hate to say it, but the same way that I think that what we got to just a minute ago with, God killing, that's not an objective morality. Killing is not bad. It's who does it, when they do it, even to the point of killing babies. So when you say there's no objective morality for us, I mean, Eric, I'm sorry, but I got to say the same thing, back to you guys, that, I mean, the Bible even clearly demonstrates it's all conditional on where the word came from, and as y'all were talking about earlier, what's the motivation behind it? So every action is conditional.
And that's why I think Landon distinguished between killing and murder. Murder is always wrong. If I am defending my family, if somebody's trying to attack my family and I kill them, that is not murder, that's killing. And that's why he distinguished between those two things. But
yeah, I've got to jump in there real quick, because when he's equating God saying to go and commit mass genocide against another people, including the suckling infants, I'm sorry, that to me classifies as murder. And when you can look at it and say, because God said so, this is not murder anymore, like we were talking about earlier, that's when things become, in my opinion, extremely dangerous. Anything you want to say on that, or you want me to keep going?
Well, I would like to point out that there's a differentiation in the law between manslaughter and murder, and first-degree murder and second-degree murder. It's not as simple as killing or murder. What I think Landon was implying is that God is either commanding it or he is not. If God is not commanding it, then it's murder. If God is commanding it, then it's killing and executing the will of God. But since we're using the Bible, as all the problems that we've already mentioned about that, you're still not ever really reaching a point where you can say it's one or the other, unless God is speaking directly to you, as is apparently the case in the Bible. If God was speaking directly to those people in the Bible, but not speaking directly to people now, you're still only getting the revelation secondhand from the people, from the recipients of the revelation. So now, if God commanded, as he was saying, even genocide, even large-scale genocide, if God did command that, then it would still be a good act, even though there isn't really any way to differentiate it between murder and killing. There really isn't. How do you actually prove that it was a revelation from God? Belief, faith. That's it.
And I mean, I think that leads into, the one, at least in my opinion, the one takeaway from the Bible, the one real law that is outlined there. It has nothing to do with the 10 Commandments or the 600 and whatever laws that are done in Deuteronomy and all of the Old Testament, Leviticus, all of that. It has to do with 13. One thing, and that is follow orders. It's you either follow my orders, you do as I say, or it's a sin, period. Now I'm going to put some other commandments out there so when you're not listening to me, you can kind of get a gist for what I want you to do, at least in general. But basically, follow orders, you're good. Don't follow orders, even question those orders, and I'm going to punish you. So, all right, let's keep going.
I still, just to hear you use the word bad,
Right.
to hear the word bad and yet say it's a subjective thing, I go, oh, come on, Ned, would you admit that even using the word bad is kind of, that could mean anything. One person's bad is another person's good.
No, because, like I said, Eric, based on that test, based on the test that I just said, I think that we can define bad actions. And, in fact, I don't think that you could really get around not being able to define an action. Again, let's say I go kill a baby. If I kill a baby, and that action is adopted by society, if that practice continues, that's going to harm society in multiple levels. Therefore, it's a bad action.
But why is that aspect, Ned, in a sense, bad? Why should I sacrifice my pleasure for the benefit of society? What if I enjoy killing babies and I genuinely get pleasure out of it? Why should I submit anything that brings me pleasure to society? What do I care about society? They're all going to die. I'm going to die, and it's not going to matter when we're dead anyway.
Okay, and in the same way that if you're a sociopath, more than likely the morals of the Bible are not going to matter. The reason that we care, and again, this goes into more of a societal level than an individual level. And the reason that we care is because we are part of humanity. And the analogy that I use here is that I'm sure you guys have all played on different basketball, baseball, whatever type of teams. Why is it good for your team to score and other teams not to score? Well, because we have, and I know you guys are going to hate this word, we guys have evolved, we primates have evolved to a herd mentality, so to speak. And just as we see graduated morality through all of the animal kingdom, even starting at the insect level, going all the way up through primates and us, and depending on the complexity of the brain, for lack of a better term, we see different levels of morality expressed. Well, the same way that we care about our team, we're going to care about our species. Because a species that cares about itself is going to have a better chance of survival as a species than one that would not. Therefore, an outlier that says, well, I like killing babies, is going to be, in just about every case, ostracized and pushed to the side, if not punished for those actions, because if left unchecked and adopted by society, it would harm the species.
Let me just insert one quick thing, Eric. I know we got to wrap up right now, buddy. I think the difference that I would state in when we present morals that come from the Bible is the difference that we have that atheism does not is conversion. And ultimately, we've seen changed lives due to conversion. So when we present morals and principles from God, ultimately conversion brings about proper change. And we're not saying that unless one doesn't submit to that these laws, for example, if somebody enjoys killing babies, they may continue to do so if we quote the Bible at them. However, within the Christian framework, there is always that possibility of redemption, which always brings about change.
And I could demonstrate probably as many, if not more, conversion-type stories when people have moved away from religion. I would assume that you would think that someone that is indoctrinated into ISIS and would go to an atheist point of view would probably be closer, and depending on the sect of Christianity even, would be closer to the quote-unquote objective morality. So I don't know if that test holds up when both sides are weighed.
Here's ultimately my problem, Dad, with what you said, how we've evolved the herd mentality. All you've done is demonstrated, if that were the case, and obviously I disagree, but if that were the case, on that basis, all you've demonstrated is what is happening. You have not demonstrated what ought to happen. So why is you still can't use the word good and bad for the herd surviving? Why, if I go underneath your argument that herd survival is good, whatever helps it survive is good, whatever hinders its survival is bad, hang on, let me go underneath that and say, why is it good or bad? Why is that? Why isn't herd unsurviving good? Because there are people out there that would say humanity is killing the planet, and we actually need, as a herd, our herd mentality is bad because we're killing the planet, so a bunch of us actually need to die, and that would be the good.
Right, and I understand that. And in fact, I use that analogy that, what's good for our species may not be so good for the other. Like, I mean, I know you don't agree with this, but 65 million years ago, that asteroid that supposedly came in and killed off the dinosaurs was pretty bad for them, but very good for us. So what I'm saying is I think what you're trying to get at there is the is-ought problem. And
right.
The same way that, you want to pin that we can't get an ought, neither can religion. Because every ought is driven by a goal. And without a goal, well, that goal dictates your oughts. In other words, if you ask if I drill down and say, why should we survive, I can do just the same thing with following God and say, well, if I don't want to be with God, if I would rather be in hell, ought I not act different? Which absolutely I should, because my oughts are driven by my goal. So the objective ought does not exist. The ought is always contingent on one's goal. Without a goal, there is no oughts.
Yeah, obviously I disagree 100% with that, because the perspective of atheism that we are, if it is the herd mentality, you can't get an ought from an is. There is no way to go to here's what should happen. We should survive, and your whole analogy is based on, hey, what is good is that which helps us survive.
Hold on, pause it there.
Is that which makes it fail. So then I can say, so.
I don't think he heard what you just said.
Yeah,
I don't think if he did hear it, he didn't understand it, or he didn't like it, because you pointed out that the ought is a problem just as much for him as it is for you, and he seems to be still thinking that it's only a problem for atheists.
Right, and I actually, and again, I give him all the credit in the world for this, because we being our backs to the wall with time, I was really worried that was what was going to be the end, but he did give me the last word here and allowed me to basically reiterate what I just said. So I think you're right.
And by the way, I just want to say that was an incredibly good point that you made, and that's something that needs to be discussed more and brought up more and thought about more, and I'm glad that you got that out in this discussion.
Well, thanks, man. And like I said, I mean, again, we're way off topic here now as far as the problem of evil, but allowing it to kind of grow a little more organically, there is some benefit to it, which I'm so much on the fence right now. Should I put a stop to these rabbit hole discussions and just go, guys, we're supposed to be talking about this, we're not going there? I can't decide which is better. So I mean, I'm up to discuss that if nothing else. So all right, so I'll go ahead and keep going. Get back to that.
Anyway, I just gave the analogy.
Right,
hey, Ned,
maybe I missed.
Let me give you the last word here, and then I really got to wrap up.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm going to give you the last word, and then
Okay.
Landon and I'll wrap up.
Well, this would spark us into a different conversation.
It always does.
Exactly. I wanted to point out, if I misspoke there, that what I was trying to get to is that, even though I'll admit that I have no absolute or have no objective oughts, religion doesn't solve that, because, again, without your stated goal of wanting to be with God, there's no oughts. There's nothing that is objective from there. So you can claim that, but it's because you have the goal of wanting to be with God. With that, I just want to tell you guys, thanks for having me on, and anytime in the future, I'll definitely take another day off of work, and we'll do this. This was fun, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ned. I appreciate it, buddy. I'm glad you interacted with us.
Yeah, and I really love good civil discussion like this, Ned. So
Yes.
thank you very, very much. And all the other atheists out there, we like this. Hey, Christians, when you can't have a civil discussion.
Okay, I think that's pretty much the end of the discussion as far as that part of it goes. So I'll stop the screen share and go back to my wonderful icon, because I'm sure people would much rather look at that than my real face. So. Anything else you wanted to say or talk about?
I not right now. I think that pretty much covers everything. There were a couple of points that I wanted to make throughout, but I left it off because they weren't that important, and we needed, just for the sake of brevity, to keep moving. But all in all, I think that was a really good discussion. Some really great points were made and discussed and at least acknowledged. That's the most important thing. Instead of just ignoring them or pretending like you didn't make them or dancing around them and just playing this game of cat and mouse that is the exact opposite of the type of discussion that Landon seems to value the same way that we do.
Yeah, and
that is, to me, that's all the difference. Is if you want to have these kind of discussions, you can. Just don't play games. Don't do the kind of apologetics where your entire goal is to distract and obfuscate and try to shut people up. If you actually want to be challenged, if you have the strength and the courage to be challenged in your position, then go have a conversation where you're vulnerable. It's not that difficult, so long as you have confidence in yourself and what you believe, and you're willing and able to be wrong and admit that you're wrong when you are.
And
that's all I have.
Well, and that was what made this, at least for me, so enjoyable and refreshing. I mean, I was so worried that I was going to walk into another discussion like I had with, Matt Slick and Bible Thumping Wingnut, and I mean, I hate to say it, but even G-Man when I had that discussion. It seems that everyone, not everyone, but for the most part, these discussions are so they're so scripted because people are worried about looking bad. And once you just say, look, I'm going to let down all of my defenses and let's see how what I believe stacks up against what you believe, that's when we can have a really great discussion. Do I think these guys did that? I think to a great extent they did. I don't know if they did it completely, but I guarantee you, if they asked me on again, I would definitely take another day off of work. I would, Eric invited me to come down and actually participate in the training seminar or whatever. If I could get down there and go to Pensacola, I would go. And it wouldn't be to go in there and try to embarrass him or make him look bad. No, it would be in the same light that we had here, because I really felt from both sides of the discussion, we were trying to figure out what all this stuff meant. And as long as we're doing that, it's worth it. And yeah, so again, I am really, really pleased with this. Is probably, as far as my one-on-one with a theist versus me, an atheist, whatever you want to call me, this is probably the one that I've been most pleased with. Not because I think I did that great as far as making points, but because it was fun and it was an open discussion. That's why I'm going to drop another name here, why I like Losoyo so much. Because when we have discussions, he's honest. Michael, his co-host over there, they're open. And guys, if we can get to this type of stuff, I think we can actually make some headway. So, that's all I got. Matthew, thanks for doing this with me. It was a great idea, and I'm glad you didn't beat me up too much.
No, I thought you did great, and I completely agree with what you said. I don't even really have anything to add to that other than, by all means, let's have more of these discussions, and I'd just like to compliment again Landon and Eric for the way they conducted themselves.
Yeah, again. I hope you see this, guys, and thanks again. If you ever need anything, I'm here, and if you need somebody new, this is your guy. I'm telling you, if you like how I discuss things, Matthew definitely does a better job than I do. So, yeah, if you have a hangout,
come on.
Dude, seriously, I mean, that's why I value your input so much, because you're someone who I think is looking for truth as well, and I think you would do it would do them a service to have them on your show. So, guys, if you see this, contact me. I'm sure Matthew would love to come on, and I would highly recommend you add him. So, with that, guys,
Well, thank you.
No problem, man. With that, I think I'm going to sign off, and hopefully this wasn't too long. And if you stuck with us this long, please let me know where I screwed up, where you think we're right, where we're wrong. Comment. I want to be beat up. So, thanks again. Good night, everybody.